Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Hi teachers, we're Apps for Good, and we give schools like yours free introductory computing courses. Our courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculum. Independent learning is central to our courses. Your students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create prototype apps for good. We'll even connect you with industry volunteers to give real-world feedback. Let's empower every young person you teach to shape their future with technology. Speak to us at www.appsforgood.org. Imagine having your own instructional coach available 24/7. Now you can with the Teaching How-Tos platform. This highly personalised social platform empowers busy teachers to learn and apply evidence-based teaching techniques, either independently, working collaboratively with their peers, or with our new AI assistant. The platform features over 160 visual guides to teaching techniques, designed to help you quickly and easily implement high-impact practices that boost student engagement and improve learning outcomes. Join over 200 institutions worldwide that are elevating their teaching practices with the How-To app. No gurus, just practical support anytime you need it. Interested in finding out more? Visit teachinghowtos.com and register for our next webinar.
Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Watch sessions by thought leaders in education, literacy experts, and EdTech specialists from the International Reading Conference for free. The lineup included renowned speakers such as TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui and beloved children's author Michael Rosen. The three-day conference explored a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Sign up to receive the recordings for free by visiting the Reading Solutions UK website at readingssolutionsuk.co.uk.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out! Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading!
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Sunday Social with me, Miss H Teachers, aka Anna Hudson. I am delighted to be back with today's show, where we'll be focusing on a topic that is very, very close to my heart: inclusion. It feels like a really important time to talk about this topic. There are so many barriers at the moment. Schools and families are facing incredible challenges, frustrations, emotions around inclusion, particularly when it comes to areas like EHCPs and SEND provision. And I think it would be remiss of us to not mention a new government and what changes they may bring. It is, as always, a very interesting time for education, and it feels like the right time to have these conversations. There's been so much negativity in the last couple of years around SEND provision. Are things going to change? Is this a new hope? Are we going to see the reform that so many of us think needs to happen? How are we going to change the systems that are in place? Do you think that they're broken? Do you think that they need changing? I would be really, really interested in hearing your opinions today. If you would like to join in or respond at any point, please just look to your left-hand side. You'll see a little microphone. If you request to speak, then obviously we can let you join in that conversation. I'm really excited today to be unpacking the question around how we navigate the SEND system when so many of us feel that it's not fit for purpose. And more importantly, how do we support those children with special educational needs and disabilities? I'm going to be joined today by Deb Hollingsworth, who I'm really excited to chat to actually. But before I introduce her, as always, I want to just do a quick check-in. I think as educators, as teachers, as support staff, it's really important that we take a moment to reflect on our own well-being. I know I say it time after time, but we cannot fill from an empty cup. We need to be mindful of our own mental health. We need to be mindful of our own barriers. We need to be mindful of our own boundaries. So with that in mind, how are you today? How has your week been so far? What's one positive thing that you've taken away from this week? And what is one thing that you are focusing on this upcoming week? Is it a positive? Is it a negative? What things are you most looking forward to? Whatever you're doing today, whether you're listening live or on playback on Spotify or Apple, thank you so much for tuning in to Teachers Talk Radio. I feel incredibly proud to be one of the presenters with the team, and was very fortunate to come back for some brilliant kind of networking over the last couple of days, and was a proud champion of the work that goes on at Teachers Talk Radio. If you are a first-time listener, or maybe someone that's new to how this works, I cannot recommend the CPD element enough. There are literally hundreds upon hundreds of podcasts on there, live radio talks, Twitter spaces like we've got now, events and meetups, and it is literally all free. I kind of coined it as the home of free CPD, but I can't stress that enough. You know, as anyone that works in the education system, we need to keep an eye on the current trends. We need to keep ourselves informed at every opportunity. That's really, really hard when we think about well-being, and we think about our time management, and we think about all the strains and stresses that we have as educators and the things we have to fit into our busy day. So that's why I love Teachers Talk Radio so much, because literally in the car, when you're doing your washing up, gardening, whatever it is that you're doing, you can literally listen along and just get this wealth of knowledge, opinions, debates, talks. So I highly recommend clicking on Teachers Talk Radio, however you follow them, and looking at what's available, because it's absolutely brilliant. So with today's show, inclusion, what matters, how we navigate the systems that support our children with SEND. This is such an emotive topic. There are so many positives when it comes to inclusion, but we know from teachers, from schools, from families, that there have been some real negatives in navigating the whole field of inclusion, whether that be the challenges around diagnosis, pathway, EHCPs. And I think we're all aware of some of the shocking stories that are out there. For me personally, when I was kind of doing some research for this show, I was really shocked by some of the data that, you know, I thought I've got really good experience in terms of SEND and kind of AP. I'm lucky enough, for those listeners that don't know me well, to actually work in alternative provision. So I've got quite a bit of background on SEND. I come from a family of teachers. We've all worked with children with special educational needs and disabilities pretty much for our whole careers. And I sort of felt like, as a teacher that works in AP, well, you know, I've got a good understanding. I understand the pitfalls. I understand the challenges that we're facing. And, you know, like everyone, you try and keep up to date with as much of the data as you can. And then I started to do a bit of a deep dive. And with that came some really, really worrying statistics. I cannot imagine, for the families that are facing these challenges and hurdles, how overwhelming that is, and that data is. But for me, I sort of think it speaks for itself, really. So when we think about our children with special educational needs, there are, according to the DFE, there are over 1.6 million children in the UK who all have those special educational needs. The statistics show that this is ever increasing year upon year. And unfortunately, there's been a sharp rise in waiting times, in families having to fight for the support and the provision that they need. For schools have found themselves in very challenging situations as well, because they too are fighting what in some cases has been quite a difficult battle. So since 2019, EHCPs have risen by 27%. In January 2024, there were 576,000 children and young people that have educational healthcare plans. This is an increase of 11.4% since 2023. I just want to take a little minute to reflect on that. In less than a year, 11.4% increase, and it is ever increasing year on year. Now, in some ways, I applaud that. If our children need that support, then they absolutely should have it. But are we seeing that rise reflected in the funding that our schools get, in the support that our families get? I would argue no. And central government funding statistics would tell me the same, because the funding has only risen by 42%, which shows us that it's clearly not enough. Our children with SEN needs and no EHCPs have increased to 13.6% in 2024. Again, that is a rise from 13% in 2023. And with that rise, we are seeing a trend and common types of needs coming through. The most common type of need for EHCPs at the moment is ASC. And for SEN support, it's speech, language, and communication needs. Now, I think as teachers, we see that in the classroom all the time. We know that our children need that additional support. But are we being given the training? Are we being given the funds? Are we being given the time to fully explore that and to be able to put the best possible provision in place for our students? In terms of families, we know that in some boroughs, children are waiting way past the 20 weeks for an EHCP. In some cases, there are children that have waited up to 2 years. The SEND complaints to the Ombudsman have tripled in the last 5 years, with 94% of complaints upheld. I was reading some of the cases that have come through, and the impact it's having on families is absolutely shocking. There was one case quite recently where a whole family needed counselling after the trauma of the EHC process. That is not okay. I think as educators, we see the struggles that our families are going through and fighting for that support. And as a school, I think many schools are given as much support as they can, but there's only so much we can do. There's an additional need there from schools to have support from local authorities to get those EHCPs for them to be granted. I think the fact that 94% of complaints and appeals are upheld, that out of the 350 complaints, and this has come from a Schools Week analysis, between June 2023 and January 2024, all 350 were upheld. And there was a payout of £716,000. That is in 6 months. So I think we're absolutely seeing here that there is most definitely a flaw in the system, and most definitely some shocking statistics really that we need to unpick. We know that our government needs to do better. There's been a change in government now. Are we going to see things improve? How do they improve? If things are this bad, where we're seeing, up to 2 years for children to wait for that educational healthcare plan, that support system, that net that offers that that really detailed support plan that offers that solid ground for the work to be done, how is a new government going to fix that? And how are we going to do it quickly to make sure that these statistics rapidly change? Well, this is something that I'm really looking forward to unpicking with you today. But before I introduce our first guest, I really just want to say a huge, huge shout out to our sponsors today. Teachers Talk Radio, it is built on the support of an incredible network, and our supporters are really, really important to us. Firstly, we have John Catt, and the show is actually brought to you today in partnership with John Catt Educational. They're publishers of professional development books and resources, and they support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Now, you can level up your professional development if you visit John Catt Bookshop today, because you can explore the full range of titles, and believe me, there's something for everyone on that website. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. I cannot recommend going on there enough. There's some fantastic books on there, and such high quality and such a diverse range of topics. You really, really will find something on there to support your CPD and your own professional development. We also have Reading Solutions UK. If you're looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident lifelong readers, then really go and visit their website. It's readingsolutionsuk.co.uk. Recently, they had a free online international reading conference, and there were speakers and personalities, including experts such as Basit Siddiqui and the beloved children's author Michael Rossin. So I really would recommend going on there and having a little look about the resources, the information that's on there, because it's absolutely fantastic. We also have Easy for You, and they are empowering education where innovation meets accessibility. Their subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionising the learning experience. By eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology, Easy for You isn't just providing tools, they're actually shaping the future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy for You are transforming education, one device at a time. So please go and find out more. It's www.easyforyou.school, and I cannot recommend them highly enough. Finally, another one of our amazing sponsors is Apps for Good. Apps for Good gives schools free introductory computing courses. Now, the courses are for everyone, including those that aren't computing teachers like me, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create a prototype app for good. You can visit www.appsforgood.org to find out more. So, as I mentioned before, I am very, very lucky to be joined by a very special guest today, Deb. Now, Deb is a Senko, a senior leader, and I'd really love her to kind of come on today and kind of help us to explore the world of SEND, the systems that we've got in place. And we're going to have a little bit of a chat about whether we think they work, how they can be improved, and what her experiences are, particularly within education. Now, Deb, hopefully you'll be able to join us if you request to speak on the little microphone. We should be able to let you in to the conversation, and we can get that conversation started, because I'm really looking forward to hearing your opinions today, particularly as an educator that is also a Senko. I think that's incredibly valuable. So hopefully, Deb, you can hear us. Are you there? Oh, we seem to be having a little bit of a technical difficulty. Debs, if you can hear us, just let us know that you're kind of able to join the chat. If there are any problems, just let us know, because we're really looking forward to hearing from you today. And I'm really interested to hear kind of from a Senko point of view, really. I'm not a Senko myself. I work quite closely with the school Senko in my provision. But I think hearing from a Senko themselves, the kind of the way it works, the challenges that they face, within large schools, I think is a really interesting conversation, and one that gives us a unique opportunity to have that viewpoint. I think as teachers, we have our own strategies and kind of our own workload as teachers. But as a Senko, how does that differ? And how do you support your staff and your teams to be able to offer that best support? Debs, you might need to request to speak. You're coming up as a listener, not as a speaker. I think you need to, if you click on the left-hand side, hopefully you should be able to click on that microphone and be able to join us as a speaker. If you, I'm just trying to think, if you are joining from a phone, you should be able to press the mic and it should come on for you. Hopefully you'll be able to join us in a second. If we've got any other listeners today that are working in alternative provisions, perhaps in mainstreams, or are kind of working as Senkos themselves, I would be really interested to hear what your thoughts are on the SEND system. How do you best support your SEND students? What are the kind of the challenges that you face yourself, and kind of how do you navigate that, and what are the support strategies that you put in place? Debs, you've come up as a speaker now. I think you should be able to unmute yourself. Are you there? No? Just wondering how, if we can grab you on in a second. While we're trying to figure that out, I just want to have a quick chat with Paul. Paul, thank you for joining us. I know that you're one of our listeners who listens along a lot. I know that obviously for anyone that doesn't know Paul, he also works in a primary school. Paul, I'm just interested in your views, sort of as a teacher. Hoping to pull you back on later when we've had a good chat with Debs. But how are you? How are you finding navigating the SEND system as a teacher?
Yeah, difficult. Very, very difficult. And I think you've got Debs there as well. So yeah, I'll just say that is increasingly difficult. And we've just found out that some of the children that we've got coming in September, I've got some severe SEND and personal needs, which is really difficult to deal with because we're a very small school as well. So our teaching assistants are more and more not so much teaching assistants as in classroom assistants. So it's an ongoing problem, definitely.
Well, I've definitely got some questions to ask you about, because some of my experiences around the kind of the EHC process and what we're seeing as an alternative provision supporting mainstreams, I'm really interested in hearing your opinions on that, and I look forward to having a good chat. And feel free to jump in at any time throughout the convo, but I've certainly got a couple of questions I'd love to pick your brain on. Debs, are you there? Are you able to join us?
Right, good morning. Can you hear me?
We can, Debs. Thank you so much for joining us. For anyone that's kind of been listening along, I'm just going to introduce our first guest. It's Deborah Hollingsworth, and I cannot tell you how excited I am to have you on today, Debs. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for giving up your time today. A massive thank you to Paul as well, because it's kind of two sides of a coin really here, because obviously I'm from AP. But for our mainstream colleagues, our mainstream listeners, having yourself on as a Senko and having Paul there is a little bit of feedback from kind of primary, but also from a teacher point of view. I think it makes for a really interesting conversation, because we're all just trying to navigate the systems we've got in place. And although, like I said, I think we're all tentatively hopeful that things are going to change. It's early days. It's very early days. So we're not quite sure how that's going to look yet. So Debs, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so delighted to have you on. Would you mind telling our listeners a little bit about kind of your journey into education?
Yeah, absolutely. Both of my parents were teachers, so I suppose I'm second generation, and I grew up with education being in our house very much. I think they were both good and proud teachers. But I didn't immediately enter teaching myself. I graduated in 1998, quite a long time ago, with a degree in French and drama. So I suppose I've always been interested in language and in communication in all of its forms. But after graduating, I worked for a few years in publishing, reading and writing and proofreading and sub-editing for various publications, including at the time The Guardian. And I do particularly love writing, and I've always tried to keep up a little bit. So hence I've had a few articles published more recently on the topics of SEND support and EHCPs, etc. But I think basically the teacher in myself is pretty genetic, and I found publishing not to be quite fulfilling enough. And so I therefore went and completed a PGCE in 2003, and then have worked in and around North London since that as a teacher. I had the joint specialisms of French and drama. I taught above, I was secondary mainstream for many, many years. I worked as head of languages. So that was great, loads of trips, loads of skiing. You get very good at data as a head of department. But really it was the pastoral role that interested me. So then I worked as a head of year within two separate schools. Actually, one of them had a vertical tutor group structure, which was fascinating. But a discussion for another day. I don't know how many schools now have that. It was wonderful.
Oh, how
But
interesting.
so then I had a growing interest with that pastoral role. I had a kind of growing interest in supporting our most vulnerable students, and that was children who I did quite a lot of work with, some child protection and that team and the safeguarding teams, but also about supporting children with autism or with communication difficulties, or what used to be called behaviour and social difficulties. Now it's a much kinder phrase, the social, emotional, mental health, much more appropriate. And so at a certain point, I realised that that's where my passion and interest did lie. And I felt I would pursue a career with the special educational needs and disabilities side of it. So I actually left mainstream for a couple of years and went and worked in a special school. And I prefer specialist as wording, but there you go, a specialist environment supporting children with blindness, visual impairment, autism, complex needs, disabilities. And I'm a real advocate for anyone who is interested in the role of SENCO. I feel you learn so much by working in a specialist environment. I would really advise it and promote it. And so I then, after that 2-year stint, as it were, within the specialist environment, I did realise I wanted to go back to mainstream. But I took with me so much knowledge, and then I've had a lovely sort of career trajectory since that, where I started as assistant SENCO and then took on the role of SENCO and then a resource provision manager working with children with very complex needs. And now I'm currently in a primary school.
Brilliant. And so what is your current role now in terms of supporting within a primary school? What's kind of, obviously we've got the SENCO, but what's kind of that role as a whole? Is it just SENCO? Is there more to your role than that? What roles do you have within the school?
So I am the assistant principal for inclusion and SENCO.
Yeah.
And it was very important to me when I took this particular job, that when I left my previous job, it was very important to me to find a role as SENCO and senior leader. And again, I really strongly advocate for, and there's a whole wealth of research around the reasons why, but for that strategic position. So now I coordinate all the SEND support within the primary school. I'm non-teaching senior leader. I'm very, very lucky because, and I know that a lot of your listeners wouldn't be able to say the same thing at all, but I do have full-time admin support. We have teaching assistants in every class, and I oversee sort of the well-being of children generally, a lot of the SEND support, the training for the teachers, etc. And I work very closely with my pastoral colleagues and the senior leadership team to ensure that all of our most vulnerable children are getting all of the support that they require. And I do think it's a lovely school, very inclusive. I've really fallen on my feet. Although I will also say, with some I have actually decided that I will be leaving the school. No reflection on the school or the role, but I'm going to be 50 this year. So I've decided for a change, and come September, I'm starting as a specialist advisory teacher in a local authority. But that's no reflection on the role of Senko or the school, and I really love it. I think I think when the school values inclusion and inclusive practices, and is fortunate enough to be able to really prioritize that, then I think I think inclusion can be a really wonderful role.
I think that's really interesting, and I think it's the absolute dream, isn't it, to have that kind of team support and kind of and have a school value inclusion in that way. And I agree. I think having a member of leadership that's kind of there for inclusion, and that's and has that specialist training, and is that voice for our children that have SEND. I think it is really really special, actually, and I've for our listeners out there, is unusual in some cases, but is like you said, is absolutely vital, really, and is really really good practice. So I guess, obviously, your whole career really has led you into this point now where you are absolutely an advocate and a champion for our children with special educational needs and disabilities, and and in that role of kind of inclusion in Senko, your experience obviously will be supporting our most vulnerable children. What are the main challenges that you face within that role?
I would say that I'm quite often heard to say that as a Senko, all I really need is a time machine and a magic wand. I think the time machine, obviously, because undoubtedly what we're hearing about, the reason we're talking about this, is there is a documented and data driven, or recorded, I should say, increase in the number of children who are recognised as having special educational needs. And then actually, if we're going to try and meet those children's needs, then you do have to be highly organised. You have to be able to communicate very clearly with the families who are on these journeys, who themselves can be quite they're facing real challenges like we're hearing about, and we need to be really clear to them about both our own internal workloads and waiting lists, etc. And of course then the structures and support systems that I know that we will talk about in a little while, and the impact that they're going to face of that. So I think one of the challenges that I have found is actually really trying to put in place the right boundaries for myself as a Senko, for some of my colleagues who also tend to get very, very invested in ensuring that children's needs are met. And I'm still not necessarily that good at it, because it doesn't matter how much we do, and it doesn't matter how hard we work, you still will always have that relentless to-do list. You will still never quite feel that you've done enough, or that you've done it quickly enough. So, and then I think you have to be really highly organised in the role of Senko. I have got spreadsheets for everything. I'm a big fan of, colour coding spreadsheets, and in actual linked documents, live linked documents as a spreadsheet, and working closely, but in being honest with colleagues and with families, both internally and with external professionals, holding people to account, etc. And I think the other, with regards to the magic wand, I think there are undoubtedly times and situations where you really want to sprinkle a little bit of magic dust, or wave your magic wand over specific children or families, and it can be quite difficult to know that that's simply not possible. You want to prioritise their care, you want to help them get more quickly through these adversarial systems that they're facing, and again, it can be quite difficult to know that actually you're doing your best and you can't do more, and as long as you're doing that, then yes, that is all you can do. I don't know if you've heard, I think one thing that I found very helpful, and particularly was when I was working with children with very profound multiple learning difficulties, disabilities. I heard of somebody called Joanna Grace. I don't know if you heard of Joanna Grace.
No.
So she's a very wonderful, I think, practitioner, but working with children who are very profoundly disabled or have autism, and she herself is autistic. And she's done a lot of work around, or at least a TED talk that I watched that really informed my practice, was to reject pity. So even though there might be times when I want a magic wand because I want to wave it and make things better, actually, I don't need to feel pity, because that is a very disempowering emotion. But it can be hard to actually put that into perspective, and we have to really recognize that the families we are supporting and the children that we are supporting are on these potentially very difficult journeys, and they need care and they need time.
Yeah, I think that's for me is the thing that I struggle with as a teacher and as a member of leadership, particularly in AP, because in my provision, not all the children have an EHCP. So some can be waiting for EHCPs, some can be on that journey, some don't have them at all. And I'm in a PRU, so we're not a forever school. And our children are quite often waiting for their forever school, particularly if they're waiting for an EHCP as well. And for some of our, for parents and carers of children that are in pupil referral units that aren't and they're not forever schools, it can be really hard because they recognise that their child may need a specialist provision, might need that additional support in place, and then and they've gone on that journey and come to that conclusion and are working with the schools and the local authority and their mainstreams to get that support, and then it suddenly hits that in that journey they're thinking, okay, well, we're on the right path now, and they are on the right path, but then as the Guardian recently suggested, there's like 20,000 cases where families are waiting longer than the 20-week limit, and you've got local authorities renaming the mainstream schools so that they hit the 20-week target, when as a family, as an education community, they've recognised that the mainstream school isn't the right place. They want them to have a specialist school, and then they're stuck in this kind of system. And I think it's the families we want to support, and it's I think for all of us as educators, the children, the families are at the heart of everything we do. And yet as teachers and as educators and as leadership and as heads of schools, people feel a bit powerless because it's all regardless of whether it's a multi-academy trust or an LA school, there's nowhere to go. It's there's no further. You push as far as you can, and you push with and you walk with the family on the journey, and then the journey stops, and it's this kind of limbo. And I think you're right. I think it's so interesting about saying about pity. It's not pity, but it's a deep empathy that you feel because you want that the very best you can for that child. And I'm interested to get Paul's opinion on this as a mainstream teacher, that you do everything you can, but you recognise that there's a more specialist provision that's needed, and you can't get them into it. And whether that's because there's no EHCP yet because there's a waiting list, and there's a delay, whether it's because there's simply not a provision in the area. So the waiting game and an application to independent schools, whatever it's really hard, isn't it? It's such a hard. It's so hard to navigate. Have you found, as sort of a Senko and a leader, have you found that your role has changed over the years because of these kind of barriers and challenges we face?
Well, yes, but I can't really speak as a Senko from pre-COVID because I moved from the special school to the role of assistant Senko and then Senko at the time of COVID. So I've kind of changed my own role over the course of the years.
Yeah.
But however, I do think that there have been some significant changes since and partially because of, but certainly not entirely because of COVID. So, for example, we and I do think we had children who were very impacted, and families who were very impacted directly by that lockdown period. So, for example, we've seen a very significant rise in the number of children who have speech, language and communication needs, particularly, but not only, the youngest end of the of our age range, who are coming in and who simply haven't been exposed to that high level of vocabulary and language that is incidental when you are going around your daily business free from masks and lockdown, etc. I think we've got the emotional based school avoidance, and children who, following lockdown, either did not want or were not able to rejoin schools. I actually think that there was the social isolation that was created during COVID. We kind of created a generation of children who tend to be much more tech savvy than the adults anyway, who became very, very skilled and proficient at online learning, but also just generally on online, at navigating online systems, online entertainment, spending time alone, entertaining themselves or occupying themselves with the technology that we were providing for them. And then, I don't know what you think about this, we required them to immerse themselves in their own company and in their own screens. And then my own personal opinion, and I do know with all of these things that we talk about, it can be, we have to hear everybody's opinion, because, I'm not suggesting that I'm correct, but my own opinion is that we didn't put enough work and effort after that such a significant impactful period of time, which also went on, didn't it? Because we locked down, we opened up, we locked down, and actually I don't feel that enough went into the return to childhood, the return to play, the return to social interaction, that recovery curriculum that was really required over that intense period of lockdown. And there seemed to me to be quite an immediate return to sort of academic expectations, the attainment being prioritized perhaps more over what really was required, which was I think a lot more nurture. So, and then of course, in terms of how have we seen the role of SENCO, but also special needs change, as I say, I know we're going to come onto it and talk about it, and you've already highlighted it, and Paul has already spoken about, but the national crises that we have in educational psychology, in the CAMS, in the mental health support, etc., has just meant that there is so much more pressure on schools, on SENCOs. There's so much more requirement for us to be everything to everybody, to all people, and deliver the interventions that perhaps 10 years ago we might be expecting a speech and language therapist to come in, or we might actually expect an educational psychologist, who tend to now be only able, really through capacity, to do the statutory assessment work, whereas 10 years ago we might be saying, right, I need a educational psychologist to come and work and do a unit of work and an intervention, or guide us and train us on those interventions for specific children. So I think the role is definitely one of managing demand and managing those external pressures much more than perhaps previously.
No, I mean, as I say, I'm not a SENCO, but I would completely agree with that. And it's interesting, isn't it? We hear that word crisis a lot. In March 2024, Gillian Keegan actually admitted that parents are having to fight to get the support for children with SEN, and she openly used the word crisis and said that we have to acknowledge it. And I think as educators, we've been maybe not using the word crisis, but we had certainly been highlighting the lack of funding, the lack of EHC, lack of EPs, the waiting lists, the lack of alternative provision, however that looks, whether it's an SEND school, whether it's an SEMH school, however that looks at, there was a lack of these. And we'd all been shouting that from the rooftops for quite some time. And then she kind of admitted it and then said, oh, well, there'll be extra funding. And my instant thought with that is, well, what's the funding for? Is it going to be for additional provisions? Because we've already been told that they're making those. Is it going to be, and this I guess leads on to the next question, is this going to be for staff? To get more support staff in, to get more CPD and training for staff. But then that posed me to lead to another question and go, but is that our role? Now, when I say that, it probably sounds, I don't mean it to sound controversial at all, because of course we are all there for the needs of the children. And, I don't know a single teacher that's not, training in something and constantly trying to adapt their CPD. And like I mentioned before, it's why I advocate so much for Teachers Talk Radio, because there's CPD everywhere, all over their website. You can listen to the podcasts, you can listen to the radio shows, and it's great. But where's the line? Because like you said, we want to provide the absolute best education we can for our children and fulfill as many of the needs as we can. But some of the services that we're kind of trying to do, and the approaches we're trying to implement, are things that a more specialist service would have historically provided. And it's hard, isn't it? It's really hard to go, well, we want to be everything to everyone. We can't be. So what are we going to take on in training, and what are we going to offer, and how are we going to create that high quality provision, but not burn out our teachers, not acknowledge that we actually aren't specialists, and that, a 2-hour CPD is not going to be as specialist as someone that's trained for 2 years, to do that role, or however long they've trained for it. But do you think, and say someone is, because you've been in education a long time and had all these different roles and you've seen the changes, do you think we need to, that teachers need more support within the classroom? Do you think we need more staff? Do we need more training to kind of really, support our SEND learners?
Absolutely. I mean, the way that the current systems are set up and working or not working, unfortunately, so much is coming back on schools. And, you've touched upon there what Gillian Keegan said last year. And there's been several reports recently, haven't there? There was the green paper, and then, or the white paper, and that acknowledged how very adversarial the systems are. It's been repeatedly stated but it's not actually resulted in any yet true commitments or true prioritization. And it'll be very interesting on how we now move forward with that. And how, obviously, with the new government, how they do tackle it, because it's just such a vast issue. But to bring it back, I suppose, to your question about in our schools, then yes, I mean, we have to make sure, and again, it goes back to that SENCO as a strategic leader, which, I do talk about quite a lot because I feel so passionately about it. There was that Bath Spa report several years ago that advocated about SENCO workload and the SENCO being a strategic leader. There is no end of research about the whole school approach, how it is vital that SEND is really embedded as a priority across every individual context. And so therefore, for example, this year I've been delighted to be able to deliver training very regularly to the teachers and to the teaching assistants, and to bring external providers in to do training around, for example, autism. I've done speech, language and communication needs. I think I was various other issues that we need to be aware of, but it's, as every senior leader and teacher will know, how you then prioritise that alongside the curriculum development, the constant attainment and data requirements, the reporting, etc., and all the other priorities, the school improvement plan. You need to embed SEND on the school improvement plan in order to prioritise it, but it's still nonetheless got a lot of conflicting requirements. And for example, when I was Senko, I'm currently primary, and it's possibly maybe a little bit easier in some ways to deliver whole school training, or to gather all your teaching assistants together if you're fortunate enough to have a lot of teaching assistants within a primary area. It's still a challenge. I'm not making any suggestions that it's easy, because it's not. But certainly at secondary level, actually, it can be intensely difficult to find times on that time, the directed time calendar, in which we are going to give teachers the time for training, for embedding that whole school approach, to take on that whole school culture and ethos that is really truly required. So it is an enormous challenge. Yeah.
I agree, and I think one of the things you touched on there a little bit, which has been massive for me. So I obviously, in terms of trainees and ECTs, now, I've mentioned this on the show before in previous shows around kind of trainee, your teacher provider, your teacher training providers, and also for ECTs around kind of AP and specialist provisions and the experiences that our trainees have. And when I trained, there was one day on SEND, and that was like, well done, you've done it. Now I know that that training providers are changing, adapting. They recognise that when the data shows us we've got 1.6 million children in the UK with special educational needs, you can't just do a day. However, there are no requirements on every course for trainee teachers to do a placement in some form of alternative provision. Now, some providers will champion that and will encourage their trainee teachers to do some training in alternative provision, however that looks. Some will get to go and visit, etc. But I truly believe that every trainee teacher should have to do a placement. And I'm not saying, I know logistically there's a lot to get through, so I'm not going to put a time limit on how that placement needs to look, but needs to do a placement in alternative provision, because we need to see the journey, and whether that's the journey from mainstream into an SEND school, an SEMH school, however that looks. I feel passionately that teachers need to understand that journey, and like you said yourself, as the role for it, into Senko, you spent time in alternative provision and encourage that. I say every trainee, every ECT should go in, but I also think, and I don't know how we do it, but that every teacher should have an opportunity to go into their feeder alternative provisions, the SMH schools, the SEND schools, so that when they're spotting their children and going, I think this children needs additional support, and we have that tiered approach, and we plan, do review, and we look at it and we say, okay, here's the additional support we're putting in as a teacher. Is it working? No, they might need more. And we identify along with the family and the local authority that actually, after trying everything, a specialist provision might help that student to really blossom. They need to know what specialist provisions are out there and what they're like, and what they offer, and work in collaboration with them. And I really hope that as we move forward with a new government, they consider that, because I think it's massively important to know what alternative provisions are out there and what they look like, and to utilise their skills, because I'm lucky I get to work in partnership with lots of mainstreams, and it's a collaborative, it's a shared experience. We've got this learner we think needs a bit of support. What would you do? How can you help? And that's when we get real inclusivity, isn't it? Because we're collaborating together to provide the best possible support for that pupil. And actually, for me, sometimes that support can be actually rolled out across the class, because
definitely
the whole class will benefit from it, which is then your really inclusive practice. Debs, I'm just loving speaking to you. I've got so much to
I just want to come back on that, because I just think, I don't hear it enough, and I think it's just so vital, because, for example, the role of the Senko is so vast. It really is. There is so much to learn, and yet we have so many teachers, for good reason. There are approximately 22,000 schools in England. Every school needs to have a Senko, so there are approximately 22,000 Senkos in England, and give or take. But each one of those, many Senkos come into the role from mainstream primary teaching or from mainstream secondary subject specific. They go in from art or DT or history, geography or English, whatever their maths, whatever their specialism is. But then they have to complete the Nasenko. Until recently, of course, we're seeing that being phased out now. But now it's going to be replaced with the National Professional Qualification of SEND leadership, and I haven't looked at what that looks like yet. But the Nasenko, I think, did teach me a certain amount. It's helpful, it's useful, but it's quite essay based, and really, I don't actually understand how people come in without that knowledge of the specialist provision, of what it looks like. Like you said, what is alternative provision? What does a child who truly requires and will benefit from and will thrive within a specialist environment, what do they need? How can we bring some of that expertise back into the mainstream? And, what should their journey in transitions look like? For me, I just think that would be such an incredible point of progress if it was actually part of the MPQ send, that every Senko goes and spends a month or a term or a year, or and I recognise that logistically that length of time is not going to happen, but I'm sure for people listening to this are switched on leaders or switched on teachers, and I'd really try to get that message across, as you have, that if senior leaders in their school can actually facilitate their other colleagues going and spending time in some of the alternative provisions, then the value that's going to come back into the support in the mainstream environment is absolutely vast.
And that's how we achieve, for me, how we achieve really high quality inclusivity, because we're including our specialist colleagues, and we're taking that practice and we're sharing it, and we're including within our own mainstream, for mainstream colleagues, practice the alternative provision strategies that might make the difference, and it's that collaborative, fluid approach that for me just makes the best quality practice. But again, we recognise it, don't we? We know that in a large scale mainstream secondary, the with again, I come back to it, 1.6 million SEND children,
Exactly.
high levels of children with special educational needs in their classrooms. How do you be everything to everyone? Make sure you're covering everything that's required within EHCPs if that pupil has an EHCP. How are you making sure that's put into your classroom practice? How do you best support them? How do you support the family? If you're a form teacher, how do you create that connection? How do you make sure that journey for that student is positive within the school day? It is a minefield, and it's why our amazing Senkos are there to support. But it does feel like it's a mountain that's truly really difficult to climb at the moment. I just want to, while I've got so much more to ask you, and I'm just loving this chat, I just want to say a special shout out though to our sponsors today. Again, thank you so much for the support to each of them. The show is obviously brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational Publishers. They offer professional development books and resources that really honestly do support great teaching and learning in schools, and that's across the world. You can level up your professional development if you visit johncattbookshop.com, because they have a wealth of titles, of topics, of books on different areas that you can really use to improve your CPD. If you use the code JCTTR2425, you'll get 20% off your order, which in these difficult financial times is always super useful. We also have Reading Solutions UK, and they are offering best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident lifelong readers. Now you can follow them, and you can go onto their website and see what they're offering at readingsolutions.co.uk. And as I mentioned before, they offered an incredible free online international reading conference in June. So please go on, take a look and explore, because they are absolutely fantastic. We've also got Easy for You. Again, absolutely amazing sponsor. Thank you so much. They are empowering education where innovation meets accessibility. Now, they're a subscription-based offering that equips schools with cutting-edge devices that revolutionise the learning experience. They eliminate financial barriers, which is really good for our AP colleagues because we know budgets are really tough across whether it's AP or mainstream. But, you know, I'm thinking particularly of some of my AP colleagues who I know are struggling with the budget at the moment. They, as I say, they eliminate the financial barriers. They streamline support, and they are embracing technology. Easy for You isn't just about providing tools; they are shaping the future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations, which is absolutely incredible. So please find out more at www.easyforyou.school. Easy for You, transforming education one device at a time. And finally, Apps for Good. Now, Apps for Good gives schools free introductory computing courses. The courses are for everyone, including those that aren't computing teachers like me, who really need that additional support. And they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create a prototype app for good. You can visit www.appsforgood.org to find out more. Thank you again to our amazing sponsors, because without them, we wouldn't be able to produce this high quality content, and we certainly wouldn't be able to have these incredibly interesting conversations. Debs, I just want to ask you, obviously we know there's been a rise in SEND, the data tells us that. We don't like using the word crisis, but we know that there is. We know that, you know, across the board, people are using that word, I think, really to emphasise the really difficult and challenging journey at the moment that educators, that families are facing. What's been your experience of the EHC process and the kind of pathways process? What have those challenges been for and what do you think they are for kind of our SEND teams and our teachers and schools?
So you've almost asked me two questions there, because you mentioned about the sort of SEND crisis, and I think that I'm always very interested in sort of language and semantics, and I think that they're undeniably, like with this whole discussion has focused around, there are crises, there are multiple crises. There is a funding crisis. Over half of our local authorities now are tied into one of two contracts with the government. It's either delivering better value or Operation Safety Valve, depending on what their budgetary and funding issues had arisen. And ultimately, even though they have very glorious stated aims of early identification and greater support, less adversarial, increased SEN support to reduce the number of EHCPs required, and culture change and work with school leaders. But that's their stated aims. But actually, the outcome is a short-term injection of cash and funding in order to clear deficits, whilst actually reducing ongoing spend on SEND support. So there is a funding crisis, and it'll be very interesting to see how that is tackled moving forward. There is, I would say, a prioritisation crisis in terms of from local authorities, from central government, and also in some schools, certainly not all, but actually saying, do you know what, 18% of our children now do have special education needs and disabilities. It has got to be part of our absolute day-to-day. There's a crisis, like you've mentioned, nationally, and as Paul at the beginning mentioned, there is a well-documented crisis within special schools and specialist environments, and I would be very surprised if if any SENCOs listening haven't got some experience of children who really truly would thrive much better and be better supported by more knowledgeable and specifically trained staff in a specialist environment, where also perhaps the physical space is much better set up for children who can be quite self-directed or possibly experience more frequent dysregulation than their neurotypical peers, actually that there is a crisis in national capacity there, and we're all experiencing that. So, and of course, there's the collapse in all of the NHS services that are set up to support us. That's speech and language therapy. Waits minimum, I think that currently isn't the minimum wait for assessment of ADHD is about a year that I've heard of, and autism 18 months. But very often it's much more. It's much longer than that, and even the assessment of may well then result in a long written report, which makes recommendations for schools, whereas actually what is required is more specialist. Some specialist intervention. And all of it, like you've mentioned, has been acknowledged by the outgoing government and, in fact, the incoming government by, Wes Streeting, and it has now declared that the NHS is broken, is the policy of the government. And I would almost argue, with no disrespect to any colleagues working in these services, but I would almost argue that social care is also better, perhaps, within that terminology, but of course we haven't yet got any major commitments or ideas on how to improve it. And in terms of the main challenges with the EHCP pathway, we've covered it a little bit. Those timeframes, I think it's around 50% of EHCPs from the most recent data that fell outside of the time frame for issue. And I think a lot of that, you cannot get an EHCP without having either an educational psychology assessment or a clinical psychology assessment. You have to have one of those as part of the process. Usually it is an educational psychology assessment that is required, and yet we have a national price miss. I have literally this year been trying to get a private provider to come into the school to do some work, and I cannot find one with capacity. And when I did find an educational psychologist, I was quoted £1,200 for a day's work, which is obviously outside the funding of any school, let's be honest, really. And then also you have got quite a high turnover of staff within the local authority, so which does result in local authority case officers, many of whom have actually left teaching, but who don't always have the knowledge and experience and expertise of what a good EHCP should look like. They may not know. They don't have the time and capacity to come and get to know children in any way, I think, anymore. I think, and sometimes in some instances we have what we know are quite complex cases being assigned to case officers who really don't even understand some of the terminology. Again, it's a job you have to learn. It's a process of learning. So I certainly don't mean any disrespect to anybody doing the job. But it's really intricate and highly skilled, and unfortunately, sometimes the people are assigned to cases where it's really challenging, and they don't have the time or the knowledge and the expertise to actually do what is truly required if that EHCP process is going to work. So I think you've asked how we might improve the process around EHCPs, and we all have to acknowledge, we all know it's an absolutely massive challenge. It's huge, and Bridget Phillipson has acknowledged that already, that she's acknowledged the scale of the problem. She's said that she's not willing to make promises she can't commit to. She's said that she's admitted that the first thing the government really need to do is get a much better understanding of the issues. I'd argue some of that came with the SEND and AP improvement plan last year, but certainly there's more work to be done there to really get a clear picture. But it does need a national joined up strategy and review. And so my personal recommendations, I suppose, would be, we now have EHCPs replaced statements of special educational needs 10 years ago in 2014. So we now have 10 years of experience to review the process. And the people who really, truly know the most about it are the SENCOs. because that is what such a key role of our job is: the annual reviews, the EHCNA requests, the scouring and understanding of documentation, the putting in place of interventions. So I would really like to see SENCOs playing a really central role in reviewing the processes. We also, of course, know that in order to review the EHCPs and how they are put in place, it will require an overhaul or a review of some very key legislation in terms of the Equalities Act and the Children's and Families Act. So, and also, of course, some statutory guidance documents such as the Special Education Needs and Disabilities Code of Practice. And so it is it's huge, and it's complex, and it's intertwined with so many other services and support areas. But I do believe it's possible. I would like to see a national framework for standards, and it's hugely difficult to create standardized ideas and ideals nationally on what is by its very nature a very individual and personal process. And you know, every child's needs are different, every family's needs is different, every school's context is unique. So it's difficult to get those national standards, but some excellent work has already taken place on that. But it's currently taking place on a kind of piecemeal, local authority by local authority way, whereas actually it needs now to be centralised, so that we bring together those experts from all sorts of places and look at the work that has been done and come up with something that is much more national and much more cohesive and joined up. And I also think that I would say the same about the ideas which have been partially implemented of making EHCPs themselves online more responsive electronic documents. But actually what's happened again is that this has been introduced by local authority and local authority, and what I've heard back from many SENCOs is that all it's done is actually, in some instances, I have again no doubt that in some areas it is being done well and thoughtfully and carefully and in consultation with the parents, with the families, with the SENCOs, but actually the use of electronic versions of EHCPs must necessarily reduce burden, reduce paperwork, reduce barriers, be user-friendly and be standardised, so that we don't have this current terrible situation where I currently, for example, working across 4 local authorities, and it's totally different paperwork and systems, etc. in each one. So I'm really hoping that with some of the sort of, as the adversarial systems having been acknowledged, the Labour government, which appears to be saying some of the right things in terms of the scale of the challenge and their priorities, that actually we might see a more cohesive review now, a review of what's happened in the last 10 years, in order to make sure that we put in place something much more sustainable moving forward.
You've put it in. I couldn't have put it better myself. I completely agree, and I think it's, you know, the heart of this is about that equality of opportunity, like you said earlier. You know, in having a standardised approach that makes things that, like you said, that is standard across the board, that allows that kind of the reduction of kind of the burden of work, but is also, you know, giving everybody that kind of like that parity, that opportunity to be open, transparent, but equal is really important, because it's something that, you know, you mentioned before, to touch on, you know, see, you were at a point where there was no EPs, you were trying to get obviously an independent EP to come in. And sometimes I think about, you know, the borough I work in is a really challenging borough, and one of the things I think about is, for some of the families, you know, there's no opportunity to go and fund, you know, in some areas, you know, parents to self-fund EPs to get those EP reports and get those diagnoses. Not every family has that opportunity, and so the wait list gets longer. And, you know, I think again, I touched on it before, and it's something that I said to Paul. I'd be really interested to hear his thoughts on it. So, Paul, I would be interested to hear on this. Is that in some local authorities, everybody recognises that the child would benefit from a specialist provision, and yet because the 20 weeks have been and gone, they are naming the mainstream school on the EHCP so they can tick it off the list that they've that they've hit the target, or within the target kind of trajectory. That's not at the benefit of the child, but it hits their target, and it's not equal, it's not fair, and it's based on, how many provisions in the area, if the LA have got the money to send them out of borough, etc. And so I think, like you said, having that kind of more centralized approach would be really good. Paul, I'm hoping that you're there. What's been have you had any experience of this as a mainstream teacher of LA's kind of naming the mainstream, even though everybody acknowledges that they need a specialist provision?
I've not personally, but it could easily have happened, to be
Yeah.
fair. One thing I mentioned that Deb's mentioned as well is that kind of within the local borough. I mean, there's hubs, isn't there, basically, where Senkos get together, maybe head teachers come along as well, and try and find a solution, sort of 5 heads are better than one kind of thing for a particular child. Now, those meetings, you may only get through one child. First of all, for the people to find out all about that child, and then for them to come up with ideas, and then your meeting's gone. But you might be going in hoping to speak about 2 or 3 children. So the process just takes an extremely long time. And like Deb said as well, the paperwork is massive. It's just ongoing. Our Senko, who's actually also our family support worker, who's also a teaching assistant, she's the hardest working person. She really is. She's staying up till all hours to get so many things done, and she is irreplaceable because she has such a relationship with the parents as well. We're in a challenging area socially, deprived, as well as within, sort of challenges within the school itself. So the amount of paperwork, the workload is just overpowering. And we've actually got our deputy now is trying to get a whole grasp on the Senko role, and it is not easy. And like you say, it is not just a CPD out someday, somewhere, and you can just, now I'm a Senko. It takes a lot to actually understand the ins and outs and the background to it. Even, basically where teachers wouldn't have that whole understanding or specialist knowledge.
And the wait for Senkos as well, and for all teachers actually kind of supporting children. But I think because there's a responsibility for Senko to know the area, to know the area they're working in, to know to have that specialist knowledge, but also to understand the local area, the local demographic, the challenges of the parents, that you're the face of kind of, and for a lot of parents, the Senko is the go-to to go, well, have you got the answers? Can you help? Like, what can I be doing? What can you be doing? How do we support this lovely child?
They're a social worker as well as as well as supporting the child, which is at the front of all this. They're actually supporting the whole family, and it's that thing of schools and teachers taking on extra roles, which support services can't now do because they don't have the funding, because the council doesn't have the funding, because the government don't give the funding to the council. And it's just it's a knock on from the top, and certainly not just for the last 10 years, it's good 15 plus. When Sure Start centres were taken away, these parents or these people who've had these children are not automatically great parents, and a lot of people don't know how to look after their children in a way which is going to benefit them up to the age where they can actually go into school. And that's why schools are then taking that burden on when it comes to them starting in reception, and the parents maybe don't understand or don't realise that actually that first 5-6 years has now led to this situation in school, and that's happening more and more. So schools have to deal with it more and more, and you're asking a TA who whose job description really is to support teaching in class, support the systems within school, and their list now is emphatic. It really is, compared to what it actually should be, which the job actually stated it would at the beginning. It's now changed a lot.
I think that's such a valid point as well. Like, what our support staff do is incredible. I know that Debs, you were saying about obviously having a team of kind of around to kind of support, but obviously you acknowledged it yourself. Not we know that kind of some, you know, I'm an AP, so we do have a strong team to support as well, but not every mainstream colleague will have that. And I think, how do we support the families? How do we make sure that, you know, they understand the process? I had a family say to me, you know, we've got no experience of this, like, what do we do? And it really struck me that I thought, you know, not every parent has and carer has experience of SEND needs, I suppose. Do they, Debs?
No, absolutely they don't. And I think that's the most vital, a very crucial part of the Senko role is really trying to get to know and build relationships with the parents, recognizing that every parent is on a journey, that every journey is unique, that they are facing adversarial systems. Some parents, the contrast between some parents who are going to be quite reticent and reluctant and against intervention, and things. I've had a number of experiences where with parents who don't wish for their child to be referred for assessment, or don't wish for their children to be taking part in particular interventions, and to guide them through, you have to be patient. You might have to put it on a back burner, might have to wait and just, do you know what, I'm going to work with that parent over the course of a long time to help them to understand, to signpost them, to engage them, to help them to come to terms with the fact that a child, their precious, much wanted, much loved child, actually does have additional needs, and that does need to be recognised, and it does need to be supported, but they're not quite ready yet. You've also got the very contrasting parents where they might be quite requiring quite a lot of help and support, or they might even be quite demanding of help and support, because again, for them, their priority is their beautiful, unique, original, favourite or special child. And so actually they want their help and they want it now. And so you just have to try to understand each parent's own knowledge and skills and experience, their commitment and their journey. But so I think respect and partnership working, you have to set aside time. I mean, even things there are certain meetings when you're going to have a parent meeting, you have to think about, right, how long am I giving this? And if in fact we're talking about a referral, a young child being referred for potential neurological assessment, I often put in an hour and a half, as an initial meeting, because I might have tears or I might have upset, so you have to just take the time and the patience, which again can be very difficult when we do have so many and diverse commitments. I think also, if anyone's thinking about becoming a Senko, I think you have to get to know your local area, the support services available, because there are, in every local area, there are excellent support services, but you might have to, it takes a while to really find them out, and that might be charities doing amazing work. It might be parent groups offering support on particular issues. You also have Sendias, and again, Sendias, like many of our services, is dependent on the knowledge and skills of the individual who is advising the family. But I think we need to increase the visibility and funding for support services such as Sendias, because otherwise the role of the Senko, who isn't actually independent, and in some schools they will be facing different pressures, and but actually to be able to signpost to a knowledgeable, independent team willing to support and help is vital. And I think that it does appear to me that there is growth in the area of private SEND consultants to advise parents. In fact, I put my own toe in the water on that, a little bit, sort of. But actually, like, I think it was either yourself, I'm sorry, or Paul, who said parents shouldn't be needing to spend the hundreds of pounds that is required to get that knowledge and support from an external expert to guide them through the mountains of paperwork and the numerous reports and the delays and all that systems that they're having. It shouldn't be a requirement that you spend hundreds and hundreds and in some cases many thousands of pounds to access really high quality, knowledgeable specialist advice. It just seems to me that we really do need to support better. And again, I'm hoping that some of that will come from a review, a knowledgeable review from central government. Fingers crossed, let's be hopeful and hope that we're going to see some wonderful changes, which will take time. But yes, I think that the support for parents is vital.
Yeah.
And should be free.
Yeah, I so agree. Well, so as you know, obviously we're sort of, as we move into the tail end of the show, if I'm thinking about the incredible work that Senkos do, and the teams that support them as well, absolutely amazing. But what about in the classroom? If we know we've got children who maybe have those EHCPs, and we're getting advice from our Senkos on how to have that inclusive practice, or if we've got children who have undiagnosed needs or have a SEND needs and don't have an EHCP yet, or maybe don't have one at all. What do we do as teachers? What can we be thinking about? What can we be doing to kind of create that inclusive practice? And Paul, I'd invite your comments on this as a kind of a full-time class teacher. But Debs, is there anything that comes to mind for you that you think that's a top tip to take away or something to consider?
Well, I think that, having that whole school ethos, but at the top of that whole school ethos is I would say my number one thing is there must be, but be it secondary or primary, and I believe primaries, again, might just be slightly better on this for good reason, but you have to make sure that every teacher knows the needs and the skills and the strengths and the areas to support for every child with SEND. And I'm always a little bit, when I hear, and I do hear it quite regularly, of schools that don't have some form of pupil passport, individual action plan, individual learning plan, whatever you're going to call it. The information must necessarily be shared with all teachers, because how can teachers possibly offer high quality, adaptive first teaching, the effective inclusion of all children, if they don't actually know the individual needs in front of them and in their class? And I think that's a bigger challenge at secondary, as I say, than primary, but it has to be put in place. And then beyond that, I think you've got certain things, like you've said, that you can be applied across a whole class context, but which it will benefit many children, not only those with SEND. And that is, the classic differentiation and scaffolding. We talk much more about scaffolding nowadays. Sort of the visual timetables or the visual cues, the use of visuals to structure the lesson so that the children can follow visually where they're going and what they're going to be doing. Knowledge organisers, SEND friendly knowledge organisers, really thinking about your pace, your use of gesture, your use of actions, your body language, yourself. Every school must necessarily have positive and consistent rules, because without positive and consistent rules, children don't know their expectations, and there will be much more frequent dysregulation and upsets. And then also, I think having key, and again, this isn't necessarily within a classroom, but making sure for a Senko, I think there are some slight they're not easy wins, but slightly, which of our children do need to have a regular daily check-in? A lot of children will benefit hugely from 5 minutes in the morning or 5 minutes in the afternoon. It's not a huge investment of time with someone who's just going to check individually with them and make sure, how's your day gone, or what you're looking forward to, how did you get into school, little chat so they know who their key and trusted adults are. And then I also think the use of brain breaks and which can be done in a whole class setting with a 1 minute activity that gets your children moving, or it can be put in place more formally, but making sure that we are not requiring our children to sit and copy from the board. I mean, that's one of my bugbears actually, but to sit and have a lot of teacher instruction relentlessly for an hour at a time without making sure that we're remembering they are children, that that's not their natural way of being. Give them plenty of chance for peer talk, for movement, for use of concrete resources, and some of those things can actually be quite quick and be put in place very regularly. And I think that the benefits can be huge.
I think that's such a useful tip. What about yourself, Paul? Like, obviously for me, that instantly, Deb's kind of advice makes me think about, kind of gives me a little bit of impetus to go, just let me double check I'm doing all this. But is there anything that you're kind of doing as a teacher day to day that you're finding sort of helping to support, in your case, so many children in the classroom with SEND needs?
Yeah, it is. And I mean, last year, more so last year, it really struck me the number of children who are low ability learners with SEND needs,
Yeah.
but have got good behaviour. If your child is in that group, then the chances are that they are the one with the least amount of support, because they are not a challenge to the whole class. They may try and they can sit with someone else, but they might just copy from them and not really learn as much as you'd want them to. So it's that group really, and in the classroom, I would say, even before the lesson starts, think about where they're sitting. Where are they facing? What have they got behind them? It's little things like that. I've got at least 2 or 3 who go walkabout every lesson for various reasons. So where do you put those children so it doesn't impact on the whole class, but they can then maybe reintegrate themselves later on in the lesson? Lots of visuals, like Deb said, just anything to make the experience easier without taking away the opportunities of the rest of the children. So those children who are capable and able to learn from your style of teaching, get them mixed up, maybe with some of the children who need that extra support. It's like when I'm a kind of PE specialist as well. So as I get older, I am getting the children to do more demonstrations, to be honest. So in the actual classroom with other lessons, there's absolutely no problem in getting those higher ability children to support others and do it that way. That is just one small, easy way which doesn't sort of affect anyone. It consolidates the higher learners' learning and ability, and they've got a friend with them as well, which is always good.
I think that's brilliant, and definitely something that I'll take away from today.
I think if I just come in quickly though, Anna, I would say that we should do another show at some point with I'm sure we've got loads of other people who are listening or will listen to this show with their top tips. And there's nothing better, is there, than listening to someone else who gives you a little top tip and you just connect with it and you think, oh my gosh, if I do that, that can really revolutionize things in my classroom. And I've got a few of those that I'd love to have the time to share, but obviously we don't today.
Yes, but Debs, I would absolutely love that. And as I say, please, go, obviously, you're on social media, please do kind of tag us in stuff as well so that we can share it with listeners, because that's really important. And like you said, it's all about that collaboration. And I could spend another hour just getting all that information off you, because you've got so much to share and I'm so interested. So we absolutely will look at doing another show, because I think we acknowledge, again, I'm just going to harp back to it, 1.6 million children with SEN needs. We need to create these collaborative opportunities to share good practice and share those top tips. And I would absolutely welcome that from you. It'd be great. I just want to say a massive thank you both to Debs and for Paul for contributing today. I hope that everybody listening takes away something from today. I think we all recognise that there are issues within the system and that we are navigating potentially a very challenging and arguably broken system at the moment. But with a change in government, I am hopeful, as we all are, that things will change. But what I do know, regardless of anything, is that everybody listening today and everybody that works in education from the ground up are here for the children and want the best, and that we are all, as teachers, support staff, educators, doing everything we can to support those learners, and long may that continue, because we are their champions. And never forget how difficult this process is, however hard it gets and however frustrating it gets, because at times it really is. We are championing our children. We are doing the best for them. And alongside the families, we are the voices for these children. Never forget the important work that we're doing in championing and campaigning and getting them that support. Again, thank you to everybody who has listened today. A big shout out to our sponsors, John Catt, Reading Solutions UK, Easy for You and Apps for Good. Our show would not be the high quality that it is without you. Again, thank you so much to Debs Hollingworth today for coming on and for sharing so much interesting information, and to Paul for giving us that kind of mainstream perspective. I really hope that you take something away from today, listeners. I hope that you have a fantastic week, and please give our speakers a follow, because they have a wealth of knowledge that they're ready to share. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.